Hey everybody, what's going on? Hexlex here with another Master Duel video for you all. So it is about that time again. Once every about 2 weeks or so, I like to come back to our metagame analysis series that I've kind of been starting here, where specifically I like to go on Master Duel Meta and look at the decks that were submitted that reached either Diamond 5 or Diamond 1, and kind of compile those to show what the ranked ladder meta is looking like. Now, as far as like that data goes, it is like not the most complete, admittedly, in the world. It is only comprised of those decks that people are submitting to Master Duel Meta. So it's going to largely focus on the TCG side of the ranked ladder. That is to say, like, you know, the Americas, like EU, like that general audience. And again, it's only going to be people who are actually actively submitting the decks. So it's not like the most complete data in the world, but it's, you know, honestly, with what we've got, it's a pretty good litmus test to see what the meta is like. Now, there are also some occasionally decks that will hit both Diamond 5 and Diamond 1 with the same person. I am actually willing to double count in that case, because as far as I'm concerned, if you made it up through like at least Platinum, but up to Diamond with a deck, and then like through Diamond like 5 all the way up to 1, like those are both like very, you know, those are both like, what am I trying to say? Valid climbs in and of themselves. So I'm willing to, basically what I'm saying is like I'm willing to double count a deck if it reached Diamond 5 and then also Diamond 1, as I feel that does kind of like push it above, like, you know, a little bit above and beyond reaching Diamond 1 there. So yeah, if you are interested in seeing some of the previous results, we're actually going to go over the previous like 2 weeks results before the last 2 weeks, but definitely feel free to check out some of the other meta analysis videos that we've done here on the channel. And if you're interested in supporting the channel, generally speaking, outside of subscribing here on YouTube, feel free to check out the link below. You will find my Patreon page, where you'll get sneak peeks to content like this and some bonus content like games, Q&As, other fun stuff we do over there that is going to be exclusive to the Patreon. That does get updated every single day, so feel free to check that out if you want some more daily content. But without further ado, let's just jump straight into it. Alright, so real quick, I'm going to briefly go over the previous videos kind of breakdown here. This is an analysis of decks that reached Diamond rank, again that's 5 or 1, from November the 10th to November the 24th. Again, we already talked about this in the last video, but we saw that Sword and Soul kind of overtook Branded Despia over those 2 weeks by a significant amount, almost 2%, which is fairly surprising. These are also the immediate 2 weeks after Scareclaw got introduced, as well as Beyond the Pendulum, so makes sense that we're seeing them and Endymion represented here. Eldritch isn't too much of a surprise. Adamantipator came about as a result of the Anti-Spell Festival, actually. You know, that was the kind of like top quote-unquote obvious pick for that festival, was Adamantipator there. So, you know, we saw people then using the deck more in the ranked ladder as well, which isn't surprising, you know. When a deck picks up in popularity in a festival, even within that rule set, it tends to see more play in its quote-unquote regular variant on the ranked ladder as well. You know, interestingly enough, I think this is a great look into how like representation can affect a deck's spot on a tier list more than power level. Adamantipator was arguably at this power level the whole time to be represented at this amount. It was just a matter of enough people actually playing the deck for it to be represented here on the tier list and bust out of the other category. And then we saw live twins. I think this was more of just like an anomaly. We usually don't see this many live twins, but they were seen enough over the course of these 2 weeks to show up here on the pie chart. So again, Sword and Soul taking a notable lead over Branded Despia, but I think that was also just a bit of an anomaly. Maybe people were getting a bit burned out on Branded Despia, but I think that would have also been the case for Sword Souls as well. More so, actually, Sword Soul being the older deck between the two. Flandres, we also started to see a dip in play here. Even though the barrier statue didn't get banned until the 30th, it had already been announced within this time frame. So even within that time frame, we were already starting to see that less people were interested in playing Flandres. So again, these are the results from the previous video. So let's go ahead and take a look at some more current data from the last 2 weeks here. Alright, so here we have the results from the last 2 weeks of Diamond ranked decks that hit Diamond 5 or Diamond 1. This is going to be from November 24th to December 7th. So I say last 2 weeks. This is at the time that I'm recording this, although this should only come out like a few days after. Like I think this will come out the like 9th or so, the schedule I'm currently planning. But I wanted to make sure that we did it on the 7th so that we weren't including any of the new decks. I wanted to make sure that we were hitting a time window that, okay, this is what the meta is like up until the release of the new selection pack. Now, I don't think the Labyrinth selection pack that introduces Labyrinth and Runic, I don't think that's going to like hugely like change the meta, but I still think it's important to define those parameters there. So, talking about the actual decks that are on here, you can see the names are kind of small because there are so many different decks represented, which is why I have them typed out over here, along with their percentages as well. But notably, we are seeing Brand Despia a decent bit above Sword Soul once again, exactly 4% actually. Branded Despia coming in at 15.1%, and Sword Soul being represented at 11.1%. So this is about more in line of where I think Branded Despia and Sword Soul are. Sword Soul has definitely now joined Brand Despia, I think, once again at Tier 1. There was a little bit there, you know, particularly in Season 10, where we started to see Flandres catch up to and even overtake Sword Soul. Brand Despia still being the clear top Tier 1 deck, but for a while there, you could argue that it was Flandres that was the other Tier 1 deck. That or, you know, it was pretty much Sword Soul and Flandres kind of fighting for that lower Tier 1, upper, like top of Tier 2 slot, kind of pushing each other out back and forth. Now with the barrier statue being banned, Flandres is taking a hit, not only in power, but mostly in popularity. You can see Flandres is actually down here, now at number 5. Well, tied for number 4, I guess, technically, with Dragon Lake here. But Flandres definitely further seeing a dip in gameplay here in the week before and then following the ban of the barrier statue. But more or less that has allowed Sword Soul to kind of retake its spot as the second best deck, up, I would say, in Tier 1 with Branded Despia. Marine Sis having a very nice showing over the last 2 weeks, coming in at 5.8%, well past the release of Cosmic Ocean. So Marine Sis definitely has some staying power, it would seem. After that, we have both Dragon Link and again Flandres at both 5.2%. Flandres, I honestly expect that we'll see dip even lower after this, because there were still like, I think there were 2 builds in that last week there from the 24th to the 30th where there were still a couple that were submitted using the barrier statue. Now moving forward, the barrier statue is going to be banned altogether, and we won't be seeing it show up in all of these meta reports. I expect that we'll see, like in the next 2 weeks moving forward, that Flandres' representation will dip even lower. I don't think it'll be like quite go to Rogue. I don't think it'll be quite in the other category, but I think it'll be like more towards like down here, like towards the bottom of like, you know, being represented here. Eldritch is currently kind of like slowly, gradually seeing upticks in play. I expect this to keep happening. I expect Eldritch to keep moving upward and trending upward. I think that will be just kind of the pattern moving forward as far as that goes. Eldritch is, I expect that a lot of Flandres players, not a lot, but at least some, will be migrating over to Eldritch as kind of their stun deck of choice to ladder, maybe towards the end of the season there. So, Adventure PK, hey, Adventure PK finally, after all this time, like seeing just enough play to make it here on the actual pie chart. So that's exciting to finally see Adventure Phantom Knights over here for the first time. The deck is still, you know, I think being underrepresented still, even at this stage. Although this is a little bit more in line of where I expect it is. I think it's actually still maybe a little bit more powerful than maybe this would indicate. But again, I've been advocating hard for this deck to see more play. So it is very nice to finally see it on here represented. And then Scareclaw. When I say Scareclaw, by the way, I should have clarified this earlier. Scareclaw is, one, I'll talk about this a little bit more in detail, but Scareclaw is represented here both by Pure Scareclaw and Tri-Brigade Scareclaw. So I've kind of combined those to just represent Scareclaw and their impact on the meta overall. Scareclaw is still coming in fairly strong, still being played here towards the end of the you know, I don't want to say the lifespan of the selection pack, because obviously it's going to be out longer, but, you know, when a selection pack comes out, obviously a lot of people are going to be trying that deck. So, you know, whenever a pack that releases new cards come out, you can expect to then, in the following weeks, here in the metagame, see that deck represented a fair bit. Scareclaw is like still, this is still, towards the end of the, again, the month where the selection pack battle trajectory was released. Moving forward, once the new selection pack comes out, new decks are out, will Scareclaw end up getting pushed out? I'm not sure. I kind of suspect it will be. I don't think we'll see this, I think we'll see this in the other category, in the next 2 weeks, if I had to guess. But you never know. It could be like Marine Sis, where it ends up actually having some staying power. I actually just realized I spelled Marine Sis wrong here. It's not Markin Sis. It is Marine Sis. But alas. So yeah, that is the 2 week span over here. Now, next what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and show you what this month overall looks like. So we're going to take a look at the last 4 weeks. We're going to take a look at the breakdown for the 10th to the 20th to the 7th. So let's jump into it. Okay, so here we have the combined breakdown of the last 2 weeks and the 2 weeks before. Again, November the 10th to December 7th here. So, let's see what we've got here. As far as we're seeing represented between Branded Despia and Sword Soul, it's super close. Sword Soul had the ups on Branded Despia, the last 2 weeks, and then now these recent 2 weeks, Branded Despia was over Sword Soul once again. So as a result, we're seeing them almost exactly tied, with Branded Despia only being 0.2% above Sword Souls. Really kind of emphasizing the facts, well, not the fact, the fact that in my opinion, great statement. Basically what I think is that Branded Despia and Sword Soul are both tier 1. I already talked about this a little bit before, but I think the data here kind of reflects that a little bit as well. Marine Sis overall having a really good showing in the last 4 weeks at 5.2%. So that deck, in terms of like best of one ranked ladder at least, it seems is not only popular but consistently powerful. We'll talk about that a little bit here in a bit as well. Flandres continues to trend downward, like I said. We're seeing the same pattern that we saw in the last 2 weeks, like represented overall in the last month of Flandres no longer being the number 3 deck, as it has been for quite a while now, especially in season, in season 10 it was even more than the number 3 deck. It was arguably the number 2 deck behind Branded Despia. With the banning of the Wind Barrier statue, the popularity of Flandres and as well as the power level have taken a noticeable hit. Eldritch creeping back up. We actually, during our season, our last few analysis, hadn't really seen Eldritch represented too much, but it's creeping back up there. I think that does, like I mentioned earlier, have a lot to do with Flandres not seeing as much play anymore. Dragon Link is kind of to be expected to show up somewhere on the list as well. It's a pretty consistently powerful deck. It's got a lot of combo potential, obviously, so tends to see pretty consistent play. Endymion, I'm not too surprised to see Endymion here at all. Given that Beyond the Pendulum came out, the deck got quite a nice power boost from that. And also, the deck is kind of like, I don't want to say a pet favorite of a lot of people, but it's a notable deck for a lot of people because of how complex the combo lines tend to be. I think a lot of people kind of tend to pay attention, especially when it does pretty well, because it's just kind of a cool deck in that regard. So the other category also, I want to point out that like 56.9% is a pretty large other category for overall, especially over the course of 4 weeks there. So again, I don't know how much this is going to change once sprites and tier limits come out, but I think what we're seeing over here is definitely a healthy meta, especially now that the barrier statue has been addressed and Flandres has been curbed, not completely, but at least a little bit. Like, Flandres is still annoying to play against, but it's definitely more manageable now, right? I think we can all agree on that. So, I think as far as, like, especially given what is tier 1 here, Branded Despia and Sword Soul, it's funny because I'll see people complain, particularly on the subreddit is where I see it the most, the Master Duel subreddit that is. I'll see people complain about Branded Despia and Sword Soul and how oppressively powerful they are. And I've never seen somebody make that exact statement, but people complain that, like, as people do, like, people complain about the tier 1 deck no matter what the deck actually is. I just think it's kind of funny when people complain about Branded Despia and Sword Soul, especially given what's coming in the future. Branded Despia and Sword Soul are definitely fair decks to be tier 1. Branded Despia does generate a lot of advantage. It is a little bit unfair in that regard, but it's not like, it's not putting out a bunch of negates. It's not like, keeping you from doing anything. It's just having a lot of disruptions. And Sword Soul, even though it does have negates, it's like it's Chi Shao plus Baron is like whatever. It's not that much to play through, and it's not that hard to deal with either for most. Even like rogue decks, honestly, like playing second, like it used to be when you're playing against like Drytron, for example, or even Tri-Brigade to a somewhat lesser extent. During that first Master Duel format, but especially Drytron, if you were going second, it was so like abysmally like it was such an uphill battle, right? To go second against that deck, but it can be, and that's not to say it's easy to go second against Branded Despia and Sword Soul, but it feels a lot more manageable. And I think that this kind of, especially the data that we've been seeing over, like since we started doing this series of decks that have specifically hit Diamond rank, there's such a variety, especially within the other category, but even in general, like we're seeing so many different decks represented at different points on like the tier list. I mean, look at Marinesis here. Marinesis, as far as I know, like never made a splash in the, wow, I didn't even intend for that pun. Marinesis, as far as I know, never really made much of a splash in like the TCG or OCG, but Master Duel's ranked ladder, both between the ban list and by virtue of being best of one, have allowed for a unique format where Marinesis is like actually not bad at all. Like, well, again, I'll talk about this a little bit when we talk about some data trends, but just again, the variety of decks that we're seeing, I think, is truly a testament to like, I think this, like, how good this format is. I think we're in a very good format right now, and I don't think many people who have played a whole lot of formats would disagree with that. I'm just thinking of like other tier 0 formats I've played. I haven't played this current one. I don't play the TCG, so I've not played the tier limits format, but I've played other tier 1 formats. I've played in Tallied, I've played in Pepe. I didn't play in Zodiac. I don't know if you want to call Dragon Wars tier 0. That's like a whole argument, but I did play during that format. Honestly, that format, I would say it felt like we had 2 tier 0 decks, but I digress. So, long story short, I've played in a lot of formats. This one feels pretty healthy in my opinion, and I think the data here reflects that as well. Speaking of data, we do have a couple of notable data trends that I wanted to just cover real quick, so let's go straight into that. Okay, a few talking points here that I just wanted to mention. I've touched on these briefly, I think, already through the course of the video, but we'll talk about these a little bit in a little more detail now. Scareclaw, as I mentioned, is represented by both the Pure and Tri-Brigade variants. The Pure Scareclaw decks do notably outweigh the Tri-Brigade variants about like 2.5 to 1. And Scareclaw did very barely miss making it out of the other category for the overall like 4-week graph that we looked at last, is what I mean by that. Basically, the threshold there was like at least 10 decks, and Scareclaw had 9. 9 between Pure and Tri-Brigade, and it was I think it was actually just like 6 Pure and 3 Tri, if I recall correctly. So, yeah, as far as that goes, as far as like Scareclaw almost making the mark, I think, again, that's mostly because it was released in the selection pack, that came out in Season 11 in November there. So, moving forward, I think we will start to see a decline. And I did actually notice in the last 2 weeks, there was already starting to be a decline of how many Scareclaw decks were hitting Diamond there. I don't think it's a bad deck by any means, but I think it's, again, just another point towards the whole like representation matters, and as far as like showing up in the metagame here, where it's not always about power level. A deck can have the power level to show up, in quote unquote tier 3 or like push out of Rogue, but as far as whether it will consistently stay there is going to be a factor of how much it's played, and that often is mostly due to just how popular the deck is, as opposed to how good it actually is. I'm not saying that's the case all the time. Like Branded Despia, I don't think is only the best deck because everybody likes it. I do think it's probably just the most powerful deck in this format, but Scareclaw and many other decks are like very much on the cusp of being able to make it out of Rogue and into tier 3. It's just a matter of enough people playing them that they make it out of Rogue there. Marinesis actually being one of those decks. Marinesis has been performing consistently well enough across multiple weeks to be considered tier 3, if not lower tier 2. It's definitely lived past the Cosmic Ocean hype, so Scareclaw is kind of in the midst of the battle trajectory hype. That's the name of the selection pack there. I was trying to remember it that whole time. Scareclaw is like, still in the midst, or we're still in the midst of that hype. when we were looking at that data here. Cosmic Ocean, on the other hand, definitely came out a little while ago, and Marinesis has definitely lived beyond the hype of that pack. So Marinesis has been around long enough and showing up long enough in these reports that I would definitely consider Marinesis out of the rogue category. If it's not tier 3, it's lower tier 2, and I think it is lower tier 2, just for how much it's been showing up. Again, just that, I guess that ability just to put out a huge towers is enough in best of one enough of the time that it can get there. So that's pretty cool. Again, that decks I didn't see too much success, again, as far as I know and from what I can tell, in the OCG and TCG, we're actually seeing a good amount of play on Master Duel, which is what we would hope for this format, for it to be, like, not so unique that it's its own game, although it more or less is, but unique enough that we're seeing archetypes succeed here that may not have succeeded in other formats. Excuse me. So, sorry, one moment. All right, pardon me, apologies. Endymion appears to have benefited most from the inclusion of Beyond the Pendulum, more than other Pendulum decks, is what I mean by that. Pendulum Magicians have also had a decent showing. DDD haven't, since they can't use Beyond the Pendulum. So, just looking at Pendulum decks specifically, yeah, Beyond the Pendulum appears in all of them except for DDD. DDDs are kind of like locked into their own archetype enough, or summoning fiends by their own effects, so they can't really make much use of link monsters like Electromite and Beyond the Pendulum. As a result, we didn't see any DDD decks at all in the last 2 weeks, and we only saw like 1 or 2 in the 2 weeks before. And I think that is because, like, again, they are the one Pendulum deck that couldn't really make use of Beyond the Pendulum. Zephyr, I think, is mostly a similar case, because I didn't see, like, God, I think I saw maybe 1 Zephyr in the last 4 weeks, but that might have even been the 2 weeks before last month. I don't even remember, but Zephyr, I'm pretty sure, is in a similar situation where, due to being locked into archetype stuff, it typically can't make much use of generic Pendulum stuff. From what I know, I don't know that for sure. I do know that Pendulum Magicians and Endymion can make use of Beyond the Pendulum, and both have. We have seen an uptick in Pendulum Magicians, not enough to break them out of the other category, the Rogue category, but Endymion has definitely performed consistently well enough over the last month that yeah, it was able to push its way out of the other category, just barely. I think only coming in at 2.9% for what I recall, but enough to at least make it on the list there as its own, like, individual deck. Most builds are using Beyond the Pendulum from what I saw, so which, you know, makes sense obviously, and yeah, again, it was expected that we would see like some kind of uptick in Pendulum decks with Beyond the Pendulum coming out. I just wasn't sure which one it would be. It turns out Endymion is going to be the deck that benefited most from it. Finally, Adamantipator usage on a ranked ladder, it fell off hard following the Anti-Spell Festival, and I mean hard. No one has submitted any Adamantipator decks that have reached Diamond in the last 2 weeks, so this whole last report, Adamantipator was nowhere to be seen. I did not see a single one on there, which is a bit of a shame, I think. I really like Adamantipator, and I was kind of hoping, I guess, that the hype would last long enough. It's funny because I saw like a decent number of posts again in the subreddit. I don't know why I browse the subreddit as often as I do. I think mostly just to get like a general feel for what like people as a whole, or at least I guess people on Reddit, are feeling about the game, and for news and updates about the game as well. But sometimes I do just like to bust out the popcorn, just look at the comments. I don't know. There's some interesting comments that appear there sometimes. But I remember seeing like a lot of posts lately about like Adamantipator boards in particular, because sometimes people will just post pictures of like an end board and complain about it, and I've seen quite a few for Adamantipator. So I was thinking like, oh, cool, that's awesome to see a lot of Adamantipator. I bet a lot will show up in the you know, when I look at the Diamond decks. And no, we did not see any in the last 2 weeks, so that is definitely a shame. But, you know, what can you do? Now, as far as that goes, yeah, that's all the notable data trends I pointed out. I do have one more segment that I like to do in these meta-analysis videos, and that's to point out some of those decks that were in the other category. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Okay, so this section I think I'm going to affectionately refer to as the Rogues Gallery, or the top of the other category. So when I say top of the other category, what I mean is like descending from the top left and then down over here to the bottom right. These are all decks that have appeared in the other category, and they appear in order, again, top left to bottom right, in order of frequency. And all of these decks here have had more than one deck appear in the other category. So these aren't just like one-off decks that, like, you know, happen to have made diamond. They, you know, one person happened to have made diamond with in the last 4 weeks. No, these have all appeared multiple times. I like to show this off just to not only talk about the decks that are appearing here, but also, like, again, some people kind of like to decry that this game has a lack of variety in it, and for this current format especially, that's definitely not the case. And I think this is kind of like my way of showing that like, hey, these are all decks that like have consistently, at least with like some amount of consistency, made it to diamond. And, you know, not even featured here are a whole bunch of one-off decks. Like, I saw like a Cloudian deck, I saw a Crystal Beast deck that was running like 4 different engines. You know, there's just a whole bunch of different decks that are able to hit diamond. So if you play a deck long enough and learn it well enough, you'll probably make it to diamond eventually with it. As long as it's got, like, you know, like some sort of like focus to it. In any case, so yeah, Scarecrow, like I mentioned, was like barely there as far as like not making it out of the other category over the last 4 weeks. Live Twins as well had a pretty good showing. Not too surprising. I actually really like Live Twins, and I feel like they're one of those decks that is stronger than they seem. They just don't get played that much. Adventure Phantom Knight, I have gone on long enough, I feel, about this deck. I feel like we all know how I feel about Adventure Phantom Knight at this point. Madolche, Cyber, and Heroes. These all 3 appear pretty consistently over the last 4 weeks, and even beyond that. These 3 decks are kind of like always towards the top of the other category, like the Rogue category. All very good decks in their own right, and it's not surprising either. These are all 3 decks that people tend to have as like their pet decks. I mean, I'm one to talk. I love Heroes, but the same is kind of true with Spirals as well. You know, Spiral and Pendulum Magicians we're seeing a lot of. Numeron we always see a lot of. Yumi Control we're still seeing a decent bit of. This one, unlike Marinsys, did kind of fall off after the Cosmic Ocean hype. Once the new selection packs came out and you know, Cosmic Ocean was kind of starting to get phased out a bit. You know, we saw less and less Yumi Control. Still a fair enough deck in its own right, though. Thunder Dragon, Salamander has kind of fallen off a bit. It was in that like tier 3 category for quite a while, actually, even following the release of the structure deck. But it does seem to have started to fall off a little bit here. We'll see if it stays in the other category, or if maybe it picks up a bit more steam in the weeks ahead. 8-Axis Blind Second we usually see here. Same with Tri-Lyrilusk, Sky Striker, Drytron, Agnister, Dinosaurs. Synchron, we've seen a couple of those lately. Megalith, I actually saw like 3 different Megalith decks that hit Diamond 5 recently. So there's that. Gravekeepers, I saw like 3 different for those. Guru Control. Mathmech and Orcust, I would expect to see more of moving forward with now the new ban list is in effect, and Galatea has gone up to 2 copies, I believe, instead of 1. So Orcust, we saw like quite a few, not quite a few, but I think like 4 in the last 2 weeks, and I would definitely expect to see more moving forward. Traptrix and Altergeist had a decent uptick in popularity, likely with the Anti-Spell Festival. These decks were seeing a bit more play. Infernoid, Blue Eyes, good old Blue Eyes, we always like to see that represented, right? And Virtual World too, even after, you know, all this time. It's not there very often, but we do still see Virtual Worlds here and there. So, and again, there are still a myriad of other decks within that other category that were one-offs, but again, these are people who are dedicated enough to the deck, and, you know, they've played it long enough and learned it enough that they've made it there. And you can too, honestly, as well. I believe in you. So, yeah, I think that's about all the time that I've got for this video. Thank you so very much for watching all the way to the very end. That does mean a whole lot to me. Also means a lot to me. If you're interested in supporting the channel, there are a lot of ways that you can do that. You know, by commenting and subscribing. Comments, let me know what you think of the breakdown here. If it reflects what you feel you see on ladder, where you think each deck lies in terms of power levels. I do plan to make a tier list kind of following this information for the Duelist Cup. and kind of assess what the best decks are to play for that. So be sure to look out for that probably tomorrow, if not that tomorrow in the next couple of days there. But yeah, I think that's about all the time that I got for today. Oh, and of course, Patreon, like I mentioned towards the beginning of the video. If you are interested in supporting over there on Patreon, definitely feel free to check that out, link in the description. I've got more daily content for you over there. So that's going to be all for this video. Without further ado, this is XLex signing out, and I hope you have a fantastic day.